Have you ever made a financial decision that sounded intelligent at the time, and then months or years later realized it quietly made someone else richer instead of you? I have, and for a long time I assumed the problem was simply that I needed better advice, better discipline, better financial knowledge. But eventually something uncomfortable became impossible to ignore. The people designing the systems I was participating in understood something I did not. They understood incentives. And once you begin seeing how incentives shape economic systems, something strange happens. You start noticing that many decisions that feel responsible in the moment quietly move value somewhere else entirely. That realization changed the way I see money, power, and influence. And it started with a single idea buried deep inside a book on economics. I was in my late 30s, running a small business, considered myself reasonably sharp, the kind of guy who reads, who questions things, who does not fall for obvious scams. And yet I kept making decisions that felt intelligent in the moment and left me quietly worse off afterward. I kept wondering why the smartest-sounding people in the room seemed to benefit the most from decisions that everyone else celebrated. I kept watching confident men on television explain economic policy as though they were doing the poor a favor, while the poor somehow kept getting poorer. Something was being hidden from me. Not in a conspiracy sense, something structural, something built into the way the game is designed. Then I came across an idea, just a few paragraphs buried in a 500-page book, that reframed everything I thought I understood about money, power, and influence. And I am not exaggerating when I tell you that what you are about to hear will not just change what you do with your money. It will permanently change how you see the invisible architecture of every decision you make. That is the promise. Stay with me. Here is the counterintuitive statement that is going to make you want to close this video. The most dangerous manipulation you will ever experience does not come from liars. It comes from people who are completely sincere. I know how that sounds. I know you want to push back. Hear me out. The people who design economic systems, the politicians, the institutional advisors, the media commentators, they are not all corrupt. Many of them genuinely believe what they are saying, and that is precisely what makes them so effective at shaping your behavior. Because when someone lies to you, some part of you stays alert. But when someone who genuinely believes they are helping you designs a system that quietly transfers your wealth and your choices into someone else's hands, you never see it coming. You do not even feel resentment. You feel gratitude. Leonardo da Vinci, who spent decades studying how water moves, how force transfers through materials, how light bends before it reaches the eye, wrote that the greatest deceptions are those that wear the mask of generosity. Vinci did not say that as a cynical man. He said it as a man who had spent his entire life watching patrons, governments, and institutions claim to serve others, while quietly extracting value from them. He understood that sincerity and manipulation are not opposites. I was reading Thomas Sowell's book, Basic Economics, when I first encountered the framework that made this make sense to me. Sowell is not a man who traffics in conspiracy. He is a methodical, Stanford-trained economist who simply asks, then what? After every well-meaning policy, every generous-sounding promise, every intervention designed to help someone, Sowell asks the question that almost no one else in the room is asking, and the answers are devastating. Not because the intentions were bad, because the incentives were misunderstood. That distinction between intention and incentive is the entire ballgame. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let me give you a picture. Imagine a river. You are standing on one bank. Someone upstream builds a dam, not to hurt you, but to create a reservoir for their own town. They genuinely need water. They build the dam with full civic pride. And downstream your field slowly dries out. No one lied to you, no one stole from you. The dam builder might not even know you exist. But the outcome is the same. You lose. Not because of malice, because of mechanism. That is how economic manipulation works at the level that affects you. The man in his late 30s or mid-40s who has worked hard, built something, and still senses that the rules are designed for someone else. The mechanism is invisible precisely because it does not require anyone to be the villain. Vinci once observed that water does not ask permission before it carves the canyon. Incentives work the same way. They do not negotiate. They do not respond to fairness arguments. They simply move toward whatever the system rewards, regardless of what anyone intended. Now here is the identity question I want you to sit with for a moment. Are you the kind of man who operates inside systems without understanding them? Or are you the kind of man who maps the terrain before he walks into it? That distinction defines everything. Not what you earn, not what you own, but whether you are navigating by your own understanding or by someone else's design. If that question landed for you, drop 2 words in the comments right now. 2 words that describe exactly how you feel at this moment about the systems you have been operating inside without fully seeing. 2 words. Do that now. I read every one of them. And if you are the second type of man, the one who insists on understanding the terrain before he moves, this channel is built specifically for you. We are not here to hype anything. We are here for the kind of quiet, serious conversation that most people never get to have. Subscribe, and you are joining a group of people who have decided to think first, move second, and never be the last to understand what is actually happening. Let me take you back to where I was before I understood any of this. My business partner at the time was a persuasive person, not dishonest, persuasive. He genuinely believed in everything he pitched. And I kept agreeing to arrangements that sounded balanced on the surface, but consistently moved value in one direction. I was not being lied to, I was being outthought. He understood incentives, I understood intentions. That was the entire gap between us. Most men resist the concept we are building here because they believe that understanding incentives makes you cynical. They think that once you start analyzing how systems really work, you lose something, some warmth, some trust, some capacity for genuine relationship. That fear is the primary reason intelligent men remain economically vulnerable their entire lives. They mistake clarity for coldness. Machiavelli identified this exact pattern in The Prince. He warned that the man who refuses to understand how power actually moves will always be governed by the man who does. That is not cynicism. That is the operating instruction manual for reality. Machiavelli was not advising cruelty. He was advising lucidity. He was saying that the world functions according to its actual mechanisms, not according to mechanisms we wish it had. And the man who insists on wishing will always serve the man who chooses to see. Da Vinci had an even more specific version of this insight. Leonardo wrote that the man who understands forces can redirect them, and the man who does not understand them will simply be moved by them. That is the split. That is the line between agency and drift. Robert Greene, in The 48 Laws of Power, makes a similar structural argument. Greene, drawing on centuries of historical observation, documents how power is consistently extracted through the same few mechanisms that depend entirely on the target's belief that good intentions translate into good outcomes. They do not. They never have. Understanding that is not paranoia, it is prerequisite. The economic examples that make this visible are almost too clean to believe. Maryland raised taxes on millionaires with complete sincerity, genuine fiscal need, genuine public support. Within 2 years, thousands of those millionaires had relocated. The tax base collapsed. Revenue dropped below where it started. The policy to help the state hurt the state. Not because anyone was corrupt, because the incentive structure said clearly, loudly, unambiguously, leave. And people responded to the incentive, not the intention. Rent control follows the same logic. A city decides housing costs too much. Politicians step in, cap what landlords can charge, and announce a victory for working people. What follows is textbook. At artificially low prices, demand explodes. Supply contracts. Landlords stop maintaining buildings because the numbers no longer justify it. New construction stalls because developers cannot project viable returns. Within a generation, the city has fewer housing units, lower quality housing stock, and the people most hurt are the ones who arrived after the policy was implemented, the ones the policy claimed to protect. Vinci described this pattern in different language, but identical logic. He wrote that every force which acts on a system without understanding that system's natural response will produce effects opposite to those intended. He was writing about fluid dynamics. He was describing all of us. This is not abstract. This is the exact mechanism operating inside every major financial decision you have been handed in your adult life. Imagine a man who saves responsibly for 20 years. He follows every piece of advice he was told was responsible. He buys the recommended financial products, contributes regularly to retirement plans, listens carefully to professionals who sound intelligent and sincere. And then one day, he does the math. The institutions that advised him have become enormously wealthy. The funds he invested in charge fees every year, whether he profits or not. The policies he trusted benefited the system that created them. And he realizes something uncomfortable. He did everything right according to the rules, but the rules themselves quietly directed the flow of value somewhere else. Have you ever had a moment like that? Now I want to talk directly to the version of you that is starting to feel a little uncomfortable. Because I know what you are thinking right now. You are thinking, okay, I understand the framework, but I am not a politician. I am not designing rent control policy. How does this actually apply to my life, to my specific decisions, to the choices I make every week? And underneath that question is another one you have not quite voiced yet. You are wondering whether you have already been on the wrong side of this mechanism for longer than you want to admit. Whether the arrangements you have agreed to, the financial products you have purchased, the advice you have followed from people who seemed knowledgeable and sincere, whether all of that has been quietly shaping your trajectory in directions you never consciously chose. That feeling you are sitting with right now is not paranoia. That is recognition. That is the specific sensation of a capable man beginning to see the water he has been swimming in. Vinci observed that most men never question the river that carries them because the current feels like their own movement. That is the most precise description of economic manipulation I have ever encountered. It does not feel like being controlled. It feels like making choices. Because you are making choices. Inside a system designed by someone else, rewarding behaviors that benefit someone else, while your intentions remain entirely your own. Here is what I want you to hold on to. The reason Da Vinci spent his lifetime studying systems, anatomy, water, force, architecture, was not because he was curious for its own sake. Vinci was building immunity. Every system he mapped was a system that could no longer surprise him. Every mechanism he understood was a mechanism he could no longer be moved by without his consent. That is the actual project here. Not information, immunity. And here is where I am going to leave you with the question that will sit with you longer than anything else in this video. If the systems you have been operating inside were designed with your compliance in mind rather than your flourishing, and if those systems are maintained not by force, but by your own sincere participation in narratives that serve someone else's incentive structure, then what would it actually take for you to stop being moved by currents you have never named? I am not going to answer that today, because the answer requires something more than a video. It requires you to sit with the question long enough that you begin to see the specific ways it applies to your specific life. Not the general principle, your life, your arrangements, your agreements. People who have encountered this idea often describe the moment the same way. They say it felt like putting on glasses for the first time. The world was always that sharp. They just had not been seeing it clearly. Da Vinci would have recognized that description immediately. Vinci spent years learning to see before he ever picked up a brush. He understood that the instrument of your power is not your hand, it is your perception. And an unexamined perception is not yours. It belongs to whoever shaped it first. Come back when you are ready for the next part of this conversation. Because something important begins happening the moment a man starts examining incentives instead of intentions. He stops reacting to decisions that have already been designed. He starts recognizing the structure behind them, and that recognition quietly changes the balance of power. Most men spend their lives trying to make better choices inside systems they never examined. But the rare man asks a more dangerous question. Who designed the incentives I am responding to right now? And the moment that question becomes a habit, something shifts. Not the system, the person. If you sit with that question long enough, something subtle begins to change. At first, nothing in the world moves. Your bank account looks the same. Your job is the same. The agreements you signed last year still stand. But your perception shifts. You begin noticing the design inside ordinary decisions. Why is this product structured this way? Why does this rule always benefit the same type of person? Have you ever suddenly recognized a pattern that had been present your entire adult life, but somehow remained invisible? Vinci described this moment clearly. The forces acting on you have not weakened, but their ability to surprise you disappears. That is the first form of economic immunity, not wealth, awareness. Because the man who sees the structure stops asking whether something sounds good and begins asking, what system does this feed? Here is the counterintuitive part few people admit about economic freedom. The goal is not to escape systems. The goal is to see them clearly enough that they stop operating through you. Most people imagine freedom as the absence of constraints. Vinci would have disagreed. Every meaningful action exists inside some structure. The real question becomes uncomfortable. Whose structure are you living inside right now? Look at your professional life, your salary model, your taxes, the financial products presented as responsible choices. How many of these arrangements reward someone for your continued participation? That does not make them malicious, but it should make you curious. Sowell's question becomes powerful here. Then what? If incentives push behavior, is the outcome coincidence or design? Once you begin thinking this way, ordinary conversations change quickly. A friend mentions an investment. A colleague proposes a partnership. An advisor presents a careful financial strategy. In the past, you might have evaluated these ideas with trust or optimism. Now, a quieter question sits behind every word. Who benefits if this structure unfolds exactly as designed? You do not need to assume bad intentions. Often, everyone involved is sincere. Vinci understood that centuries ago. Systems rarely require deception. They only require incentives that quietly favor one direction over another. Think about your own history. How many financial decisions felt perfectly reasonable at the time, only revealing their true consequences years later? Was that poor judgment or invisible structure? That is the difference between reacting to events and mapping the terrain beneath them. Most people imagine manipulation as something dramatic, a scam, a fraudulent contract, a clear villain. But the most effective economic manipulation rarely looks dangerous. It looks stable, professional. Sometimes it even looks like responsible advice. Here is the cognitive interrupt. The system does not need you to misunderstand it. It only needs you not to examine it closely. Ask yourself something honestly. When was the last time you studied the incentive structure behind a financial product before accepting it? Not the explanation, the mechanism. The economic systems work the same way. Incentives are the gears. And once you start examining them, many arrangements begin revealing movements you never noticed before. Once a man develops this habit of examination, his relationship with events changes. The world does not suddenly become fair. Incentives do not realign themselves around him, but he stops drifting through them. He begins navigating. Have you noticed how certain people rarely appear surprised by economic outcomes? Markets shift, policies change, industries reorganize, and they remain calm. It is not secret information, it is pattern recognition. Vinci wrote that a man who understands the forces acting on a structure can anticipate its movement. The same principle applies to economics. The difference between reacting late and positioning early rarely comes down to intelligence. It comes down to perception, and perception can be trained. The real question is simple. Have you ever deliberately trained yours? Now consider the final idea before this conversation pauses. Economic manipulation does not persist because people are powerless. It persists because capable men rarely examine the systems shaping their decisions deeply enough to see the leverage points. That sounds harsh, but consider it honestly. How many hours have you spent studying the financial structures guiding your life compared to the hours spent learning your profession? Vinci would have found that imbalance extraordinary. The most valuable economic education is rarely about earning more money. It is about understanding the structures through which money moves before you participate in them. Once you see that, a different question appears. Not, how do I succeed inside this system, but what incentives are shaping the choices being offered to me? And when that question becomes habit, manipulation loses its strongest ally, your unconscious participation. And that's all for today. If this sharpens your awareness, continue with the next video. It will take the structure further. Support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. See you in the next video.